Welcome to another Queer and Teen video. We're so excited to have you. My name is Mitch and I use he, him, his pronouns.
My name is Amy and I use she, her, hers pronouns. So our question of the week, Mitch and I bonded over TikToks this morning. So our question of the week is, who is your current TikTok obsession, or what trend is your current TikTok obsession?
I'm all about an account called Puppy Songs, where this very talented parent writes and produces songs from the puppy voice of their two chihuahuas, Lenny and Mar. And I seriously sing these songs to myself all day long. Like, I go back and I watch these videos over and over. This is the account where sometimes my lip gets stuck on my teeth came from. And there's a lot of real bangers. Like, there's some really good songs on there, and it's a good little like mood boost.
So I love that, especially because Sarah and I will sing songs in our dogs' voices all the time. And I know you do that for Riley because I've witnessed it. So my current obsession is somebody that my sister found in a BuzzFeed article, because my sister does not have TikTok, but their name is @JustSamMorris. And it's his face, like his eyeballs and his mouth are superimposed into the UK map, and then eyeballs and mouth superimposed into the United States map. And it's basically like the UK teaching America how to use English. And so the UK map is like, okay, so we have summer and then we have autumn, and we call it autumn because of the French derivative. And then the United States is like, we call it fall because leaves fall. And then there's one where he's like, okay, and now we put our garbage in the bin. And America's like, yeah, we call it a trash can because we put trash in it and it looks like a can. And it's just so funny. And it's so interesting to like hear the oversimplification, although I do think there are some words that we got right. So yeah, that's my current obsession.
Yeah, definitely there are some words that we got right. I would definitely make that argument. So this week, we were really fortunate that we were able to get submissions of a bunch of just general questions that are anonymous about the LGBTQ community and specific things that people wanted to learn more about. And we are super excited to take this video to answer those questions because we always try to have a safe space. There's no bad questions. And this is a great way to like get some education in a judgment-free zone. So today we're going to be kind of touching on a lot of different topics. And just to do a trigger warning from the jump, we will be talking about the transition process. We will be talking a little bit about some of the struggles that LGBTQ people face. And we're going to touch like very briefly on sexual health. So just if those are triggers for you or something that you want to avoid, this is your warning, and we will drop a warning in the description as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of why we wanted to answer all of these questions in this video is because one of our biggest motivations is providing safe and healthy and accessible education to people. And these questions that were submitted are fantastic questions. They're so well thought out. And there are a lot of questions that people commonly have, but they don't know if they're safe to ask these questions. If you ever have questions and you're not sure if you can ask somebody about them, you can always come to me and Mitch. It is our job to be able to answer these questions accessibly for you. So we really appreciate these questions that were submitted, and we want to make sure that everybody knows that you can always come to us with questions. If we missed something that you really want to discuss, or you thought of a question that came up because of us answering one of these questions, feel free to drop a comment for us. You can reach out to us by email. Our agency is very accessible. But these were really great questions, and we're really excited to bring this information to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with my first couple, but I just want to add my one other caveat. In our role, Amy and I are advocates and educators. So we are not medical professionals. We are also not mental health professionals, nor do we ever give legal advice beyond educating someone about what their rights are. So there are certain things that we can't and won't touch on. But these questions, again, if you have follow-up questions, your primary care doctor is a great person to ask, reaching out to your counselor or a school counselor for mental health related concerns. And then we have a fantastic resource here called Lonnie, where we refer people who have specific legal questions. And then I actually also know a few people who work professionally in name change law. So I can always make those referrals. So just to be mindful that we're speaking from the advocate educator lens. But the first question is, at what age could hormones be administered or surgery to transition occur? So there's actually a very common misconception, especially with youth who are transitioning, that medical intervention is the first step, and that's not what it is. So before anyone of any age would pursue hormone replacement therapy or gender affirming surgery, there is a period called the social transition where, with the support of a mental health professional, a person is able to, kind of navigate what name they would like to be called, what pronouns they would like to be called. This is the time for a lot of people trying out different styles of clothing to see what feels best for them to wear. And then really the process of living as the gender that you are identifying as for a period of time to feel comfortable and make sure that that's the right decision for you. So especially with youth, being who they are is as simple as being called their names, wearing what they want to wear. And this isn't something that necessarily happens right away. So I just want to clear that up because that's a common misconception. But with the support of a medical provider, I think average age that somebody actually starts taking steps to meet with the professionals about medical transition is usually around like 14 or 15. And then hormones and surgery, it's completely at the discretion of the doctor, but it's really important for young people who are growing up that their body be fully grown, be ready for those choices. So it's different, certainly on an individual basis, and it's different with different providers. But I would say that generally the late teens is where kind of those meetings and appointments and processing start. My next question that I have is, what if our Dignity for All Students Act coordinator doesn't think our concern is real? So the Dignity for All Students Act is that protection against discrimination that exists in every school. And my favorite thing about the Dignity for All Students Act is whether or not the coordinator thinks the concern is real, they have to follow up on the report. The other thing about Dignity Act reports is even if the coordinator at your school isn't taking it seriously, if the problem persists and you continue to report it and action is still not taken, at the end of the year, every school has to submit their Dignity for All Students Act data to the state. And if the state sees that there were multiple reports of an issue not resolved, there's steps that can be taken from there. So when it comes to making a Dignity for All Students Act report, I always advise keeping a copy of what you submitted along with a date. When I was in school, we didn't have this process or this protection, and I would word of mouth report things to my principal. So I had a composition book where I would write the date, the time of when I said what I said about what, and if any witnesses were with me when I did it, because I faced a lot of bullying in high school as well. The other option that you do have is school districts often have different DASA coordinators for different buildings, and then I'm not sure that it's a requirement, but there's usually like a whole district person as well, or like a superintendent, that if a concern is really not being taken seriously, you can take it to that person as well. And certainly if you ever run into an issue where you are being encouraged not to make DASA reports, or a situation is getting out of hand, that is where advocates like Amy and myself can kind of talk through your options based on the specific situation and hopefully give you some guidance from there. So make the reports anyway, keep a record of the reports, and if the problem persists, look for somebody else to report to. And if you need, reach out to us and we'll help you identify who that person is.
Yeah, that was a great question. So the next question that we have is one that's a little bit heavier. And our answer is not to be sort of doom and gloom. And the important thing to remember in answering all of these questions is that even if the answer seems a little scary and heavy, there is always hope. Hold on to that, because some of these things can be very tough and very trying, but you don't have to be going through them alone. So specifically, the question is, what are some common problems that LGBTQ people face? So this is a great question because a lot of people don't actually sort of know what's going on in the LGBTQ community, right? So in New York State, LGBTQ people they have a lot of protections that have been put into place legally. But this does not mean that this translates across the board in our country. State by state, laws differ. There are some federal regulations that have been put into place, but federal level laws can be sort of volatile. So it's really important to know what your state specifically says. So New York State is really great in sort of taking up the mantle and fighting for equality. That being said, that does not mean that LGBTQ people, even in New York State, do not face trouble. So some common issues do include finding fair housing, finding realtors that are comfortable helping same-sex or queer couples find housing. There is a Fair Housing Act that they have to abide by, but it can still be a problem sometimes. Having marriages validated, like we said, state by state things differ. So even though federally we did see marriage equality back in 2015, 2016, it can still be tricky going state by state, or if you're going outside of the country, it can be really hard to have your relationship or your marriage validated. Finding positive and accurate media representation is a huge problem that we continue to face. We have seen an uptick in more positive representation. We have seen an uptick in representation just across the board, but a lot of times we're still falling into the historical traps of the kill your gays tropes, or, bury your gays, where something tragic has to happen in order to have this representation. I still will go into Barnes & Noble with a Google list pulled up of LGBTQ representation in books so that I can find them, because it's very, very, very hard to find representation in books unless you're really searching for it. And when I find one, it's like finding buried treasure. So that is still a struggle that we're facing. A really great documentary was created by Laverne Cox called Disclosure. And it's a really great documentary that talks about the history of representation, the history of how the queer community is treated in media. So if you're looking for just a scooch of homework, that's a really great documentary to watch. Something else that comes up very often, especially for our more adventurous LGBTQ folks, is safe traveling. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but my partner and I were planning on going to Egypt last May. And then, of course, everything closed down because of the pandemic. But before we had gone to Egypt, we had this discussion of, is it more important for us to experience Egypt's culture than it is for us to be openly dating each other while we're in Egypt? And the answer was, yes, we really want to experience the culture, but we had to have a few talks about like, okay, we're not going to be holding hands. We're not going to be calling each other by pet names or giving each other a quick kiss on the cheek. And then, so my partner is very androgynous presenting, right? She has very short hair. She's very tall. And so culturally, a lot of women will cover their hair in Egypt. And so I said, great, this is great. We can cover our hair. We'll respect the culture, and we won't have targets on our back. And she really was struggling with the idea of covering her hair because she gets hot very easily. And we were going to Egypt. But finally, I had to sit down and tell her, like, I am scared for our safety if you don't cover your hair. And so because I told her, like, no, I'm scared. She agreed to cover her hair. So, it's a very calculated decision. Even in our country, certain states, we know we have to sort of put that aside while we're there. So that is a common problem that people still face. Something else that comes up is that we find family and friends who maybe don't understand us or don't know how to support us. And that can be really scary to navigate. Mitch and I work really hard on bridging that wound. We have a support group for family and friends who are really looking for how to be allies and just don't know how to do it. So there is, again, like I said, there is always hope. For some of our younger watchers, bullying, Mitch, you touched on that, great. Bullying is a very real problem, and having that Dignity for All Students Act is crucial in protecting our kiddos. Being able to date openly, whether you're at school or whether it's just day-to-day life, that can be a struggle. One thing that there's a protection in New York State for, but is still a problem, is job discrimination. So we've gone down this list of like all these, it can be so difficult. It can also be really great. Being allowed to openly live your life feels amazing. And being able to make an educated decision on, nope, I'm going to go to Egypt, even though I know it could be dangerous.
Lots of people too have worked really hard, right, to change some of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, I have a really good relationship with our local district attorney, and he helped walk me through how I can help advocate best. And, there are allies that we find everywhere that we don't know exist until we reach out to them. So when we're talking about common problems, we're not saying that they're never going away. There have been so many people fighting in the background for us, and there are people who continue to fight. And, in my professional capacity, I'm finding allies for people everywhere in places I never thought I would. So there are a lot of problems, but that doesn't mean there's not a lot of answers and there's not a lot of hope. So the next question I had was a really, really great question. And I don't know that we've ever really been asked this before, but if LGB are sexual orientations, then why is T also included in the acronym if it's a gender identity? We could really break this down. There's a pretty heavy history behind it, but basically the answer is that transgender people are included in the acronym because in the history of fighting for equality, transgender people were really kind of seen as this like complex barrier in achieving equal rights. LGB people wanted to fight for their equality in who they can love and who they can be with openly. But transgender people were sort of seen as like this whole other battle that we weren't ready to fight, and that we couldn't get our equality if we were also helping our transgender friends really in this fight for equality. And so as we moved forward and as we gained traction and as we started really taking a look at our history, we as a community came together and said, you know what? We're not doing this anymore. We need to be the voice for our transgender, friends and family, because we as cisgender, so, on the same side as we were born with this sex assigned at birth and we still identify, we as cisgender allies need to be a voice for our transgender friends because they sometimes can't fight these fights on their own. And so we've included T in our LGBTQ acronym because we realize that we can't fight for equality if we're still holding people in our community down. So that's a really great question. And I'm super excited that we got to talk about that because there is a history of sort of holding down our transgender friends in our community because we are so focused on our own fight for equality. But what we need to realize is that as much as LGBT people need allies, transgender people need allies as well. And sometimes it is the LGBT cisgender voices' responsibility to help uplift our transgender people in our community so that we can fight that fight with and for them.
Speaking of gender, which is my favorite thing to talk about, is this next question, which I actually get all the time. This is a great question, and I get from all ages. Are there only two genders? Now, I could go into a dissertation level explanation of this. I'm going to spare you because it's not necessary. In our society, we have what is referred to as a binary gender system, where we've kind of built our public buildings and the way that we sell clothing around this concept that there are only men and women. But actually, gender is a spectrum. And so when it comes to gender identity, people fall all over the place, around male, around female, in the middle, with neither, with both, with all genders. And all of those identities have different terms, have different names, certainly have different cultural significances. The male and female binary that we see reflected in our society is actually a colonial construct that was imposed on a lot of cultures where there historically were other genders. So just because that's what we see around us doesn't mean that's the limit. Now, too, I really like to point out with this question that when we're talking about the binary genders of male and female, think about someone who is a football player versus someone who is a chef versus someone who is a firefighter, right? Like, do they wear the same clothes? No. Do they probably decorate their houses the same way? No. Their professions are different. The things that they're interested in are likely to be different. There are so many different ways to be a man. And it's the same for women. There are so many different ways to be a woman. I know women who will never wear a dress ever in their life. I know women who would wear a dress every day if they could. There's different ways, even within the binary gender, that people experience their own gender within male and female. Times that by like 1 million, and you have the spectrum that I talked about. Just like when you're playing with word art and you want to make your cool like 3D font a different color, and you have that spectrum of like 12 million different colors you could choose from, gender is just the same. And all of those identities are valid. And it's a very personal thing. It's kind of like our careers. What we are passionate about and what we choose to do is a very personal choice. And it's something that we kind of tap into by listening to our heart, following our interests, and pursuing our true path. Gender is just the same.
That's a really great question, too. All these questions are so thoughtful. So the next question we had really touched on, I think, a very personal situation. So somebody asked, how can I support my younger male cousin who's getting picked on for liking ballet? So this sort of goes back into that, are there only two genders in a way, where we were talking about how people have different interests and different hobbies and express differently. And that doesn't necessarily mean that one hobby is specifically for girls and one specifically for boys. Things exist because people enjoy them. That being said, it can be really tough when you're being raised in a society that has so tightly clung to this binary, right? Only girls do ballet and boys play football. An interesting fact is that a lot of football players actually take ballet for agility on the field. But that being said, you don't have to play football to be a man and like ballet, right? And so when you have a a friend or a family member who's being bullied because they're interested in this, there are a few different ways that you can show up for as an ally. So the very first thing is just reaffirm, validate and uplift them as much as you can. If they're being bullied in a school setting, that's where that Dignity for All Students Act comes in, right? You can report that. You can ask people about that. You can tell people, my cousin is being bullied for this, and that this isn't fair. It's not safe. It's making it a very unsafe school situation for him. Talk to the people in your life who are good supports for you. If your cousin's mom or dad is a really great support for them and they don't know, maybe talk to your cousin and say, do you want to talk to your mom and dad together? Just finding a support network and really helping build up. If you're comfortable standing up for your cousin in front of his bullies, that's a really great step you can take to be like, no, he's allowed to enjoy things. It's okay. Why do you think that he's not allowed to enjoy things? I'm not saying you're going to be able to engage in this like really great and helpful and beneficial conversation and break down the societal construct in their minds. I don't expect you to do that. All you need to do is just show up for your cousin and let them know how much you love him, how much you validate him, how much you're going to be there for him, and then help walk him through that process if he doesn't know about DASA, or if he doesn't know how to safely report this at school, if he doesn't know who he can turn to in his personal life. It sounds like you're already a really great support, and that's huge because one person providing support can make or break somebody. So just hold on to that and keep fighting for your cousin and ask him how he wants to be defended and how he wants to fight this fight together. He might be totally okay with you handling that, and that's great. He might also be like, yeah, let's go in together. Let's talk to our guidance counselor, whatever that looks like. But it's great that you're asking because that means that you're already showing up as a support for him.
And again, just like we already said, if you are ever unsure about DASA or the process to report something like that, let us know. You should be able to access that information right in school from your guidance counselor, just like Amy touched on. But if you ever, again, run into issues, we're here to help too. So we are going to touch in this next question on sex, because the next question that I have is anal sex dangerous? Now, again, I'm not a medical professional, but with all kinds of sexual interactions, there are ways to make sure that you're practicing safe sex and really be mindful of your decisions. And so there has been a lot of negative connotation in specifically men who have sex with men encounters because of our history with the HIV/AIDS epidemic that still continues today. But there are tons of programs and resources to really encourage things like condom use, to encourage regular testing with your partner. A lot of places, including up in Rochester at Trillium Health, you can access either free or really affordable sexual health care. And then here locally, Finger Lakes Community Health is another fantastic resource for seeking that medical care, for getting these questions answered more in depth by a medical professional, and for getting access to things like condoms and lubricant that make that particular sexual approach safer. It's all about being educated, being informed, and making a mindful choice. And so I definitely certainly encourage you to also, in school, when you are taking sex ed, not every sexual education course includes LGBT relationships in their curriculum, but this is certainly something that you can bring up to your teachers and even to the administration that you want to learn more about, you need to learn more about, and also identify community education programs like Finger Lakes Community Health. They often do a lot of sex health education programming that is fully inclusive. So those are just some great resources to learn even more.
Yeah. So our next question is something that also comes up very commonly. It's, can you change somebody's sexual orientation? So again, we could get into a dissertation, but we'll spare you. The quick and short of it is no, you cannot. There has been a ton of research done, and conclusively the answer always comes back as no, you cannot change somebody's sexual orientation. You may have heard of something called conversion therapy, which is something that used to be a lot more popular and has really fallen out of favor. Specifically, the Trevor Project is a group, an organization that has really championed for overturning and criminalizing conversion therapy. So as of a couple of weeks ago, 40 states have banned conversion therapy, with Alaska being the newest state. Excuse me. That's not to say that there aren't still states that do practice this, but it is very dangerous. It's very traumatizing. It's very abusive. And overwhelmingly, the evidence has come back that even going through conversion therapy, you cannot change somebody's sexual orientation. The other really important thing to know about sexual orientation is that sexual orientation is not a disorder and it's not a disease. And so we have to be really careful in the way we're approaching that, because if we're telling people we're trying to change something about them, we're telling them that we're trying to change this because it's inappropriate, it's not okay, it's a crime, it's dangerous. And being LGBTQ is not a crime. I mean, people want to say that it is, and many countries still make it a crime. But existing as a person should not be a crime. And it's really important that we don't take our own biases or our own, concerns or issues with this and try to force other people to change for other people's comfort levels. So it's really, really crucial to know that, no, we cannot change somebody's sexual orientation. The Trevor Project is still working really hard to completely ban conversion therapy in our country. 40 states is great. That is huge progress. And we're still seeing that states are overturning this and saying, no, we are banning conversion therapy. Like I said, with Alaska just having signed on a couple of weeks ago. So this fight is still going, and it's still going strong. And the Trevor Project is a great resource. They're also a really great resource. You've heard us talk about them a couple of times before. If you're a youth or a teen who's really struggling with self-harm or suicide ideation, they're a really, really great resource for that as well. Mitch, I see you're sort of struggling with a dry cough here, so I'm going to skip over your question and I'll go to the next question. So something else that gets asked of us a lot is what questions are okay to ask somebody and what questions aren't okay. The best rule that I can give you is if you would be comfortable being asked that, it's probably okay. If you wouldn't be comfortable being asked the specific question, don't ask it. It is human nature for people to be curious and for people to ask questions. And some people might be okay with asking certain questions where other people might not be. A problem that we run into when we're asking questions because we're curious is that a lot of our questions are very invasive and personal. We're asking about people's bodies. We're asking about people's sexual life. We're asking about intimacy. That's not comfortable to talk about. And we don't really need to have that information. It makes people more comfortable to be able to sort of put people in boxes because we are trained as humans to be able to compartmentalize and to be able to put labels on things so that we can assess for ourselves evolutionarily that things are not a threat to us or things are a threat to us. It's an old survival technique that really kicks in, and it's okay to be curious. What I would tell you is, again, if you're not going to be comfortable answering that question, I wouldn't ask it. If you really have this burning question, come to me and Mitch. Our entire job is to answer these questions for you. And it is more than okay to have these questions, but it's a better practice to sort of come to professionals and ask those questions instead of asking our family and friends, because if your family and friends get asked these questions, they might feel like they have to answer them because they're your family and friends. And nobody likes feeling forced into having to give up information, especially if they're not ready to give that information up. So in a one-on-one conversation, I would recommend sort of assessing the situation, but the best recommendation I can give to you is to come to a professional. Mitch, you're mouthing something and you are muted. But come to a professional if you've got those questions, because we are here to answer them. What did you want to add?
I was going to say that in those one-on-one conversations, that's an excellent opportunity to ask someone what their pronouns are. In that one-on-one setting, or in a group setting, ask everyone, because that is something, it's about making sure you're referring to someone respectfully.
Absolutely. So another question that we get asked a lot is how identity is defined. This is very tricky and also very simple. It's tricky because humans are very, very complex beings. No human is ever going to be the same. Mitch and I joke all the time about how we call ourselves the Wonder Twins and we basically share one brain, but Mitch and I are very, very, very different people, and we have very different identities. So the short and quick of it is identity is defined on an individual basis by that individual. So there's no one right or wrong way to identify. And when we're talking about identity, it's a very personal journey to go on. It starts when we're infants, right? We start identifying the people we think are safe. We start identifying the things that we want to chase. I personally, my first word was kitty. I really set myself up to be a cat lady forever. And so I identified very young that cats were something I loved. And so our identity starts growing as soon as we start growing, and it changes as we change, and it changes as we are exposed to different media and different religions and different family members and different TV shows and video games and people walking down our street. And so identity is a very, very personal thing, and it never looks the same for any given person. It includes how you like to dress, what kind of hobbies you like, what kind of music you like. I will tell you that I told you my easy peasy resolution for this new year was that I was going to stop exclusively listening to my favorite band Underoath on Spotify, and I regret to inform you that as soon as I got in my car after we recorded that last video, Underoath was turned on. So my identity is very strongly rooted in the music I like, right? And so it's okay if you can't really pinpoint what somebody's identity is, because they're going to tell you every single day just by existing what their identity is. And if you're not sure, the most important thing you can do is just reflect whatever language and cues that they're giving you right back onto them and repeat the language that they're using. So if you're hearing somebody call themselves with a different pronoun than you thought they might use, all you have to do is reflect that back. And you can ask those questions of, oh, is this how you want to move forward? Or is this something that you're trying on? People will tell you who they are and how they identify in everything that they do. And it's just important to let them know that you're a safe space and that you're going to reflect back to them whatever they're giving you.
So I'm experiencing, of course, that really fun upstate New York winter. Don't have a humidifier in this room, so my throat's going to make me cough for no reason. But thank you for giving me the pause. I will come back to, why is a rainbow flag used? Now, this is my favorite topic because I am the world's biggest fan of Gilbert Baker, who was the original designer of the pride flag. A rainbow flag was called for in 1968 by Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay person elected to American office. And the rainbow was chosen because in the community, even then and always, there's so much diversity, and there are people who experience everything so differently, but they all come together and create this beautiful, vibrant community. And so the rainbow really represented those differences. And I can't rattle them all off the top of my head, although I'm going to try. But every color of the rainbow flag for the LGBTQ community actually has a meaning. So red, and Amy can fact check me, red I believe is life. Orange I'm pretty sure is healing. The yellow represents sunlight. Green is for nature. Blue is for magic. And then purple is for spirit. How'd I do?
I'm looking it up right now for you. So it was hot pink, red, orange, yellow, green, turquoise, indigo, and violet in the very first flag. So hot pink was for intimacy, red was for life, orange was for healing, yellow was for sunlight, green was for nature, turquoise was for art, indigo for harmony, and violet for spirit. So we tie magic into turquoise and indigo.
Nailed it. Thanks, Amy.
Crushed it.
But yeah, it was really to reflect the beauty of the world around us, the beauty of diversity. A really fun fact is the first pride flag was actually gigundous, and Gilbert Baker couldn't find containers to dye the fabric he was going to use that were big enough. So he actually used trash cans, excuse me.
I believe they're called bins.
Yeah. To dye each individual color of fabric before he made that flag. And again, he was asked to do this in 1968. And just a few months later, Harvey Milk was actually assassinated. And it was in his memory and in his honor that the rainbow flag kind of took off and stuck as a representation of our beautifully diverse community.
Yeah, so I will answer my last question, and then Mitch, I will let you answer your last question. So somebody asked us, how do you know if you're gay? That's a hard question because a lot of people go through it, and it's a really different journey for everybody. I know that a lot of what we're telling you is like, it's so different for everyone. The truth is, it really is a different journey for every single person. Some people know when they're little, and some people don't realize until they're in college or later in life. There's no one right way to know if you're gay. There's no one right way to come out. Everybody's journey looks different. So a lot of times we'll talk about when we're asking people like, who was your first celebrity crush? People can usually call somebody to mind. And for a lot of people who are queer, they might remember the celebrity crush they had who was of the same sex, but they didn't have the language at that time to realize that it was different than somebody else. Another thing that people do a lot to sort of ease that discussion and to sort of like bring levity to it, because sometimes people will be like, I had no idea that you were gay. So a way to bring levity to it is be like, oh, I did. So I joke all the time about how, like, when I was little, my Barbies always went on dates, and poor Ken just collected dust in the corner. And I never really knew like why I had such an aversion to Barbie being with Ken until I got older, and I was like, got it. I do know now. But I didn't have that language at the time because I was little, and it wasn't something that I saw in media. I didn't know a lot of queer people in my life. As I got older, one person in particular, and I've told her that she really was like, helped be that key to unlock this in me, is I had somebody I was working for, and she lived a very open and authentic queer life, and I was just in awe of her, and I loved meeting with her and her wife. I would go over for dinner. I house sat for them. I was obsessed with her. She was just like this idol for me. And I went from being like, I'm an ally, to being like, oh my gosh, now I know why I care so much about being an ally to the LGBTQ community, is because I'm LGBTQ. But until I had sort of that mentor in my life, I didn't have the language. And so it's okay to go through those processes and not know. It's sort of reductive to say that when you know, you'll know. But the truth is, when you start wondering things, and when you start sort of putting pieces together, when you start realizing that you might be having feelings that don't coincide with what society is telling you are typical, that's a really good time to start exploring that. And Mitch and I are a very great resource to help you explore that safely, identifying people in your life by sort of planting seeds. So, one thing that a lot of people will do is they'll bring up a movie that has like a queer storyline to assess how people react to that. And then that sort of gives you your clue on like, you know, how they might handle that. I know a lot of people will watch a movie and they'll be like, what would you do if I was gay? Sort of as like an offhanded comment, but that reaction will really tell you how you want to respond, and who you can assess for safety. So it is hard, and it's very personal and very different for each single person. I wish I had a magic wand to just be like, you'll know when you're 17 years old during March. We can't do that. I wish I had known when I was 17 years old. It would have saved me a whole lot of time, but you know, you'll get there. And the important thing is that if you are questioning, or if you're curious or confused, there's always somebody you can reach out to. Even if you don't have family and friends you can reach out to, you can always reach out to me and Mitch.
I'm going to jump in on this one too with you, Amy, because so as a transgender person who I figured out who I wanted to date before I figured out who I was. That's actually a pretty common experience for a lot of people. But for me, when I was a teenager and I was starting to like realize that I didn't really want to be in a relationship with a guy at that time. I'm still attracted to men, but at that time, with the limited dating pool I had, I started, you know, having these questions for myself. And I realized looking back that when I was younger and I was in a production of the Chronicles of Narnia, I spent the entire production hanging out with the girl who was playing Susan and the other like high school girls that were in that production. And I always thought it was because I wanted to be like them when I grew up, because at that time I thought I was a girl. And no, I just really thought they were really nice and really pretty. And it didn't dawn on me that that was how I felt until I was much older and I was kind of searching myself for my own feelings. Now, I faced a lot of bullying in school for a lot of different reasons, and I was really lucky that I was able to have mental health support. I did have one mental health support, however, who I didn't feel like I could talk about this part of my figuring out this part of myself with, because of just when I would test the waters, like Amy said, with this therapist, the reactions I was getting. And so for me, my like key to really allowing myself to go on this journey of finding my true self, it was actually a summer camp that I went to. That was an interfaith summer camp, and a lot of the people who ran the camp and who did different activities were of all different sexual orientations, all different faiths, all different backgrounds. And that experience, I started having conversations and I tested the waters with some of these adults and fellow campers. And I was met with kindness and I was able to like have more of a conversation. And it was such a game changer for me. I still think of that week in my life as being the turning point. And then from there on out, you know, I was able to connect with other people who had similar experiences in different states because of the internet. I didn't have a lot of community where I was at the time, but I had the joy of unfettered internet access. And so I did meet a lot of peers in safe settings. And so that is why Amy and I are so dedicated about having our programming constantly going, super accessible, because those spaces are so important. And so it is a process, and it's okay for the labels that you kind of use for yourself to define yourself to change, because they will change, and that's normal. There's kind of an attitude that if something is a phase, it's bad or it's wrong, or you've done something like lied to people. No, that's not it. We're all constantly changing and growing and developing through our lives. I have gone through so many different iterations of my true self until finally arriving at the point that is Mitch. And that is okay. That is normal. And there are people who are going to support you through all of that. And so always remember that. My last question, and I've kind of touched on this already, but in a similar vein, this question is, what is the process to transition? So again, I'm not a medical provider myself, but the bottom line when talking about transition, Amy, here I go, it's different for everybody. So let's talk about just kind of some of the steps that somebody might choose to take in regards to transition. The first piece is always, like I said, that social transition where you're trying on a different name, maybe you're trying on different pronouns. I went through a couple names before I settled on Mitchell. I had tried Micah, and for a while I was using Archer as a middle name until I decided to keep my middle name. That's okay. You're allowed to try things out and see how they fit. There's also, beyond that point, choosing who you share that with. Like, is that something you want your friends to call you? Is that something you want your teachers to call you? And, you know, you get to choose and you get to say who you want to refer to you how. This is also the period where, like, I started to figure out what kind of clothes I actually really wanted to wear. And I did a lot of thrift shopping to switch my wardrobe around and figure out what really made me feel the most comfortable. All of these things are kind of those first steps. Beyond that, I've briefly touched on the fact that some people pursue hormone replacement therapy, which there are masculinizing hormones, testosterone, and then there are feminizing hormones, which is estrogen. And depending on what levels your hormones are in your body takes on certain different characteristics. And so for someone who is seeking to make changes to their body to closer align the way they feel and the way they present in their body with their gender identity, that's a step a lot of people take. And it's a personal choice and something that you can certainly pursue with your medical provider. You don't have to, though. There has been this very, very common misconception that someone has to medically transition to be who they are, and that's just also not it. You are who you say you are the minute you say who you are. And if that changes tomorrow, you are who you are tomorrow too, and that's okay. There's also a really wide variety of surgical procedures. Some are cosmetic, which means they're for appearances, and then some are more in-depth medical to kind of bring someone's body into alignment with how they feel, how they identify. And again, those are conversations to be had with medical professionals. And that's a process and a journey as well. Some people, again, choose to pursue surgery. Some people never want to have surgery. That is a very personal choice, and it's not something that we really ask people about, unless, like, for example, when I'm with a lot of transgender people who are trying to figure out what works for them, we might share our experiences and what we chose for ourselves if we're comfortable sharing that in that setting to help other people make those decisions. But beyond that, we don't really talk about it. Just like if you are getting a lot of medical procedures done, right, you're not going to just share that with someone you run into in school. So there are different options. Nothing is a requirement other than that you treat other people kindly and treat yourself kindly. And I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. So those are just some of the steps. I know that's very general and very vague, but there's way too much to get into in a short video.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I know that we gave sort of succinct answers to all of these questions. They were great questions. I am so excited that they were brought to us. If you need any more clarification, if you need any more information, or if you think you might be ready to start a journey and you need some support, you can always come to us. You can always ask us. We cannot ever stop talking about our program, even when we're not at work. We're like, have you heard about the LGBTQ Center? We love it. Let us tell you everything we do. So we truly are so passionate about bringing help and assistance and support and resources to anybody who needs it. So if you've got questions or concerns or you need anything, please know you can always reach out to us. As always, we're going to leave information for the Trevor Project and the Trans Lifeline in our comment section below. We're also going to leave the 24-hour domestic violence hotline in our description. You can always call that if you need to get into contact with somebody or you need a referral to our program. We've got our Facebook page that's running, the Center of the Finger Lakes. You can reach out to us there. You can reach out to us through our agency's homepage, fcsfl.org. If you want to find us, you'll find us. So we're here for you if you need anything at all. And thank you so much for these questions you gave us.
Have a good week, everyone, and we will see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.